Hello and good evening. Welcome to the Business of Property. I'm Cheryl Leong, your host on Property Development Australia. How are we doing, property people, today? It's Happy Tuesday. I hope we are well. Those in lockdown, particularly in Sydney, this week has been all about freedom. I won't call it Freedom Day, but there's some level of freedom. People in Melbourne, I'm feeling for you. Obviously, between earthquakes, lockdown, and zombies, it's been a little bit of a bleak, bleak few months. But hopefully, this is a bit of a highlight for you on a Tuesday. We're all locked in. Anyone that's joining us today, I'd love for you to pop in the comments below. Let us know how you're doing, where you're tuning in from as well. Zombies, yes, yes, probably. Don't be surprised. I mean, when's the last time we had an earthquake in Melbourne, right? But anyhow, without further ado, I do have a guest today. Last week was a little bit of a one woman show, but I do have a very special guest. Moxin has been in our group for a while in the community and is a very active member of the community. He provides a whole lot of value, and those who do know him personally as well know that he is extremely generous with his time. Peter, hello, tuning in from the UK. I hope you are well. Good morning to you. And today I've been talking to, we talk quite a bit, Moxon and I, and I asked him about how his projects are. And one of the things that really stood out, which I thought was really interesting, is that he says, we do 10 projects in 2 years. And I said, that's a really interesting strategy. I'd love for you to share it with the community. And that's why he's here today. Moxon from Investor Partner Group. And he'll be telling us a little bit about his journey, the good, the bad, and the fugly, because at the end of the day, development is a little bit of a roller coaster. So, Moxon, I'd love for you to join us to the business of property. How are you, my friend?
Hello everyone, how are you today? Hey Cheryl.
Excellent, very, very well. You've got your whole DJ set up here, so we're
I know,
ready,
yeah.
ready to rock and roll. That's it. Oh, I need a sign thing. That's it. Next time, I'll remember for next time. But I know you put a little bit of a presentation together, because one of the things that we'd like for you to share is some of the case studies and the actual real life projects that you have been through over the years. But tell us a bit about yourself, like how, your background, how did you get into property?
Well, firstly, Cheryl, thank you for inviting me on Business of Property. I'm really
You're very welcome.
thankful and yeah, feel gratitude towards coming on and presenting. Um, who is Moxin or people call me Moss? Moss doesn't come from a rich background. Super mediocre family. A lot of what I am today is because of the prayers of my parents, support of my wife, family, of course, and the impact that I talk about, friends, family, the key sort of people or mentors that are around you. So um, I came to Australia on an education scholarship. Yeah, definitely nerd at heart. So you can say that. But yeah, a lot of what drives me inside is, the nerd himself, or the property passion comes from the nerdiness, definitely. uh, my background per se, a lot of people wouldn't know. I started off in my career as a data analyst, moved the ranks up in big funds, insurance companies like AIG, QBE, did a few international secondments before I was quite fed up with the corporate world. And yeah, I was also consulting with Department of Treasury, so Victorian state budget. So some big sort of ticket items that I did in my whole life. And yeah, qualified accountant, qualified real estate agent. Started off my tax advisory services in 2012, 13. Did my MBA from Melbourne Business School, or people call it University of Melbourne. And yeah, have been on like numerous sort of self-exploration and leadership sort of journeys. And property is just comes naturally, and that's where I've been basically over the last sort of 10 years. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Amazing data. It's funny how you said you might not know that you were a data analyst when you sort of think about how much data you go through now in terms of deciding what to buy, where to buy in your developments and with your and for your clients. It's actually not such a surprise, but we can see where it stems from. So tell when did you get into development?
Look, I didn't start my property journey in development, definitely. My journey definitely started off like a normal person, did 9 to 5, a lot of double jobs. I started off my journey when the times were of interest rates around, 7%. So have to kill yourself more to generate more income to acquire more properties. And that's the cycle that, everyone tries to catch. My property journey basically started off when I acquired my fourth property, which was a development potential property. And mind you, I didn't know that at that time that this is a development property. And
Surprise.
hindsight is hindsight is a beautiful thing, when you think back and you're like, okay, what are the right steps that you've taken and the wrong steps that you've taken. You tend to basically learn from that. So yeah, I started off there, and yeah, I did a small splitter, saved the house at the front, built two at the back, and this was in Melbourne. And yeah, and luckily enough, the guy at that time who I did it with, or the mentor that I had, I ended up partnering him with, and he is the director of Investor Partner Group now. So
Amazing.
it's been very good.
Fantastic. And so from then on, I mean, and sort of, I know you've got I've got some slides to share. Maybe let's dive into that, and then we can ask some questions along the way. So
Yeah,
anyone
sure.
anyone that's joining us, and if you know Moss, and if you've got questions for him, please feel free to pop it in the comment section. We'll always, I'll throw some at him along the way, and if and we can have a bit of a Q&A at the end as well. But
Okay.
over to you.
Okay, let me do the screen share if I do it right. So bear with me. I know Cheryl has taught me this. Okay. So just a bit of an intro about who we are and like, what made me start into property development. So naturally, people who know me, they know that I'm a vivid thinker. I like, difficult situations. I like challenges, and ultimately, building up the profile the hard way was not enough. So there has to be an easy way and a much more methodological way to do some of these things. And potentially that's where Investor Partner Group comes into play. A lot of what people don't know about this, and probably, me sharing this first time on an open forum, is it's not the money that drives me in property development. It's my ultimate goal of having a super subsidized prestige school for people who come from mediocre backgrounds. I've been working on this project for the last 5 years, and I've made some really good friends who are, working pro bono with me on this. So yeah, that's something that I want to achieve as part of my sort of property development, life, and that's where I'm heading towards. So taking a step back, um, maybe explaining a bit about, who is Investor Partner Group and what does Investor Partner Group do. So um, the group came into existence because it has three sides to it. The property advisory and the buyer's agency, that, Cheryl, you've just, talked about a bit. It is very sort of data driven, considering, my background is data. But it's more about the idea of creating wealth, of course, through property investing, but also, mind you, improving the lifestyle. So not just being paper rich, but, cash rich. Because if you're paper rich and cash poor, you're definitely doing something wrong. So quite data driven buyers agency, collect immense amount of data, and ultimately we use that buyers agencies data to also pick the right suburbs, which basically means that we want to develop in those suburbs, which is our core sort of business, coming into the property development side of things. Now, anyone who does property development would know that, development profits are important, but, picking the right suburbs and getting that
Hmm.
extra cream on the top is quite the key as well, and it comes to property development. So yeah, that's the sort of the core business around property developments. We do property developments ourselves and also for the clients. We align ourselves to the profits of the project, which basically means that we are mitigating the risks for the client. Our upfront due diligence and the feasibility process is quite intense. We have our builder, we have our architects engaged upfront. We are doing intense, local market studies upfront to understand all the risks that are available out there and how to make sure that you're mitigating them. So that's the beauty of aligning to the profits of the deal, and and basically de-risking by knowing all the unknowns, or should I say, know what the future head, what is the future head coming towards. Um, Also, one of the key things that I talk about, property development, and I say to majority of the people who are trying to enter into this sort of field is, don't be shy of spending money up front to know the risk, because that money would be well spent, and it has to be spent regardless. So that's a very small cost of knowing the unknowns, and picking the right sites. The third side of our business, again, it's the tax and SMSF advisory and business structures. And people have heard us or me talk about, how to make sure that, you have the right tax planning strategies in place. You're using superannuation or SMSF in the right sort of context. You're having the right business structures in place. You understand how the financial or the financing works of every project is quite the key. So that sort of business provides synergies to both the buyer's agency side of things and also the property development side of things. So yeah, um, on the SMSF side, we have about 3,000 clients, which are, we call it sophisticated investors. So we can mix and match them into different sort of development projects, and that gives us a lot of edge in making sure that we have the right deals available at the right time, and we are not taking undue risk, but we are also not shying away from when the properties are coming to us and becoming ourselves available to them.
Yeah, and see how it all sort of ties in together. I said a lot of it is around building sort of a holistic business model that supports the investor.
Yeah, 100%. It's all about like a one-stop shop, and that's what I always had in mind. We started off small, but we started small but slowly and gradually, build capacity, build space, added more services, and I like to call it an ecosystem. So it's always good to be part of Moss's ecosystem. That's what my client to tell me,
Yeah, that's right.
because yeah, ultimately,
Moss's World. I think we call it Moss's
pretty
World.
much. Yes.
Not Wayne's World, but
Not
Moss's
Wayne's World.
Moss.
That's it.
So how did you so we talked about, yeah, you can
Oh, no, no.
go through that as
Yeah.
well. How did you come up with this notion of the 10 properties in 2 years? How did you come up with that number? Why 10 and not 5 or 15 or
Yes. Look, it's an interesting sort of number, yeah. And again, it's not that when we first started the company, we started off with 10 properties in 2 years. Our thinking was predominantly very simplistic in nature. What we were thinking was, how do we make sure that we provide the right service for ourselves and also for the clients without stretching ourselves out? What
mm,
people tend to do is, they would try to absorb more and more projects, instead of quality projects. So focusing on high yield, better return projects where you're minimizing the risks versus the quantity. I want to do this, and I want to
mm,
put option contracts everywhere, and that's not how we tend to do it. And that 10 number it's not a magical number. That's our sweet spot, uh, which is basically which basically means that that 10 number is enough for us to manage the cash flow that we are going to get in that particular year.
mm.
And it's also a sweet spot from a tax planning perspective. When these big chunks of money come into our portfolio, how do we make sure that we are divvying it up properly? We are not exposing ourselves to the tax side of things. How are we holding property? So um, it's not overly strategic, but it's not simplistic in nature. It has just evolved. Um, we started off with 2, 3, and 5, and over the last sort of 2 years, we have moved into the spot of 10 properties over 2 years, and I think that's fair to the clients that you're servicing as well,
Mm.
because they expect a lot from you, and you don't want to be overstretching and not providing the right level of advice, right level of support. You want yourself to be available to them rather than just stretching yourself and running after different projects. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And who in terms of each of your projects, how do you, in terms of project management, um, who does that, and how do
Yeah.
you ensure that if you got 10 properties, is it the same project management team?
Yes. So we have three, as I said, we have three sides to the business. So we have three directors as well. So
Hmm.
it's me, Jonathan, and 𝐲𝐿, and we each basically hold one side of the triangle, should I say, or the infinity
Mm.
trio that we're going to talk about shortly. Um, so my experience is data. I'm the numbers guy. The project starts from me, the feasibilities, but the buck stops with Jonathan because as soon as there's a tick where I've acquired a property or I know that this property is a go or we should be bidding for this or we should be going for this or we'd be starting to negotiate, I'll bring in Jonathan, who is basically our second director. He has a team of small project managers under him. He is the person who would be dealing with the council, the architects, the consultants,
Mm.
and that takes a lot of stress away from me as well. So I'm focusing on one side of the deal. As soon as the deal works on paper, the execution is passed along to the other director, and he takes it away from there. Which basically means that there's a lot of this,
Yes,
because
yes.
he might think that the project is working. I would say, nah, if it doesn't work on paper, it would never work in real. And yeah, the conservatism basically plays out on the paper a lot more than in the field, and so yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And so you've got a project manager there as well.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I mean, you have to have project managers. Look, I tend to tell people all the time that the more you're going to try doing it yourself,
Mm.
especially if you are a first timer, you would miss out on something or you would fail at some point. And if you don't know how to get out of it, either you would lose time or money. It
Mm.
depends on you. You choose what do you want to lose. Yeah.
Well, you lose
So
you lose time and you're losing money somehow as well.
yes, correct. So yeah, it's important that you're providing the right team around you. It's the key. If you don't have the right team around you, if you don't have the right support, then yes, it's a
Mm.
recipe for disaster.
And so what's the criteria that you look for when you're assessing whether it's an investor partner group ready project?
Yeah. So, I mean, the process starts off with the client. It's not so much the project, yeah, because we have our own door knockers who would be, especially in Melbourne and also now in
Mm.
Adelaide. So we don't do letter drops like majority of the developers does. We do door knocks because we are all about relationships.
Mhm.
So we have our own door knockers who would go out there, do the door knock, and introduce themselves, and that's where the conversation starts. Yes, it costs us an arm and a leg,
Mm. Mm.
but I think our the response rate are quite significantly high, and we can target the property, and we know exactly when the owner is going to be ready to sell. So at least
Mm.
having that sort of indication makes it a natural pipeline. How do we
And
know?
just on that, Moss, I mean, out of interest, what's your general conversion rate on a percentage, like every out of every 100 doors knocked?
Look, I think taking a step back, yeah. So we assess almost like 50 to 60 sites a week,
Mm.
just on a desktop, research basis. We would be sending out a door knocker to only probably 20 to 25 sites.
Mm.
So, out of that 20 to 25 sites, you might not be able to grab all of them, but there is the hit rate is usually about 5 to 8. And then the balance is basically becomes your pipeline because once you've spoken to the owner might not be ready to sell right now,
Mm.
but because they've seen you in person, they would always reach out to you when they're ready to sell, even in 2 or 3 years down the track.
Mm.
And that's what we have experienced quite a bit. Rather than doing massive letter drops, having no idea or indication as to how you're going to approach it, we feel that this is a lot more direct and precise. And you're targeting the sites that you really, really want. You've done the feasibility, you've done the due diligence up front. You're almost like flipping the equation, yeah.
Mm.
You're not setting the letters out and then doing the feasibilities. You're actually assessing the sites first and then going out and doing the door knocks. So the conversation's a lot more stronger,
Mm.
and what you can offer is a lot more stronger as well.
Yeah. So you absolutely target it there. But you're absolutely, you're right in terms of it. The truth is, even if you were to let it drop or door knock, everyone's in a different stage in their property selling journey.
Yes, yes. And I mean, our experience, especially around door knocks or letter drops, was that the areas that we are looking in, every developer is looking in that area. So,
Mm,
we've been getting these, sort of conversations, especially with the sellers that, oh, I get 10 letter drops a week or 20 letter drops
mm,
a week. So naturally they know, these people are desperate. So when they see a face, then they respect it, and they think naturally, okay, these people are making an effort to at least come out and introducing themselves,
mm.
um, which just provides a completely different sort of the trust factor is completely different. The conversation heads in completely differently.
Yeah,
So
yeah, that's a good point. So they said take away today if you're not letter dropping, try your door knocking, and obviously your relationships with your networks as well. But deals are out there. You've just got to be able
100%.
to try different strategies and and just make yourself uncomfortable or pay someone else
Definitely.
to do it. If you don't
Be
want to
okay
do
to
it,
be uncomfortable.
pay someone else to do it.
Definitely. 100%. 100%. Yes, couldn't agree more.
Excellent, excellent. So talk to us a little bit about this.
We've talked about our business model. I'll take you to the next slide. This is more in relation to what we do and how we do it. I think this is more
Mm,
focused on the buyer's agency side of things, or should I say, how did I go about explaining what I did right, and basically preaching myself more, or preaching others more to follow the same footsteps. When you are going into creating a sustainable property portfolio that runs on autopilot, it's always very important. I call it a few method. People have different names. People might have different names. Is to have the foundations right. It's very, very important to get the foundations right, and having the good sort of balance between yield, growth, and return. And you would be catching or trying to catch either one of them at different point in time. Uh, so when you go towards the expedition stage, where majority of the developers or majority of the sophisticated or experienced investors tend to operate all their life, is where you're talking about small scale developments. That's where you're talking about granny flats, renovate for profits, all that sort of funky cool stuff where you can really churn out money. So you don't need massive amount of money to do small scale developments, and everyone knows that you can start small and grow quite big quite
mm,
quickly. But having the foundations right is the key. People always tend to come to me and they'll say, oh, Moss, I want to do a development, and they might have never acquired a property in their life. And mind you, you need to start with baby steps before you start to run. Learn to walk before you start to run. So it's always key that just because your profile fits the development doesn't mean that you should be doing the development. Understand the property market, understand the data, understand what the risks are, before you go into that sort of development space. Because let me tell you this, no matter how experienced you are, every development teaches you something new. So there is no such thing as cookie cutter developments. You would always find something new and learn something new with every development, and that's the lesson learned. It depends on how do you navigate that problem. You look at it as an opportunity or a challenge or an issue. So
mm,
that's the make or break sort of thing for you.
mm. And so talk to us a little bit about sort of, and I see there's a few capital requirements that you've mentioned here. So is it is it sort of the journey that you see people, I mean, that could follow if you're coming and starting your development journey?
Look, it's quite simple in the natural way. Yeah. So when you're starting off your journey of property acquisition, you would start off with foundational properties. You would go for something that delivers high growth, decent sort of yield. So it's not costing you a lot of money to
Mm,
hold these properties.
mhm,
It's not, you're not sacrificing your lifestyle. That's the key thing.
mm,
And you're catching short-term growth, not just the long-term growth. That's the key when you talk about the foundational properties. When you move into the expedition stage, basically where you would be in your life is you would have a decent amount of equity build up in your portfolio. Your overall LVR of the portfolio would have improved from, say, 80% to 70% or 60%. So you would have decent amount of equity, but borrowing or the serviceability would be coming in close to finish. So in the foundation stage, what I always tend to tell people is park development potential properties there, so that when it comes time to the expedition stage, you can pick up one of those properties, put a DA or a building approval or a building permit on it, and off it goes towards the development side of things. So your equity in your portfolio would actually help you jump into the development quite easily,
Mm,
and the process would be quite seamless. And that gives you an opportunity to basically sell these properties at a manufactured growth, catching the growth within the market as well, and then doing this again and again, which basically means that you're basically recycling your portfolio. So whatever you have in your portfolio, you're appreciating by manufacturing growth, pushing it out, bringing it back, doing it again. So people tend to basically recycle this time and time again. There are also people who would go towards the worthy properties, and worthy properties are basically, you would hear people talk about NDIS, roaming houses, micro apartments, how to generate passive income, or significantly large passive incomes. And those are basically for, the way I see it, are for much more sophisticated clients who have done this journey and are really, really cash poor now, and they want to create immense amount of cash flow. What people tend to generally do, and a lot of people are doing this right now because I see a lot of clients coming in and doing this time and time again, is that they start off the cycle completely in reverse. They'll go for an NDIS property or a dual lock
mm, mm.
or a roaming house because naturally cash is a definite attraction to everyone, isn't it? Whereas what they really need to catch is the growth and not so much the cash in the first instance. So, yes, they have a cash generating asset, but they have to wait for at least 3 or 4 years before they pay it off, generate more cash that they can build up their profile for that saving that they require to build up their portfolio, build up their or buy the next property. So they might have the serviceability, but they don't have enough amount of cash available to jump onto the new property,
In terms of
which
equity, I
in
guess
terms of
that's what
equity,
you're saying.
yes, 100%,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And what
yeah.
that does is it puts them into an interesting dilemma because they might wait for 2 years to generate enough cash to save for the deposit or the equity to jump onto the next property, but that opportunity cost or that time lost could be in hundreds of thousands. You would have missed the complete property cycle or a boost, of 2019 to 21 that
Mm,
people have
mm.
seen. Yeah. So, how do you make sure that, you don't miss out on the short term growth when you're starting off your cycle and think about the cash flow in the future? So, yeah,
Mm, mm. And I think that's why when you get to a point where obviously you have enough equity to work with, to be able to diversify, have a portfolio where there is a mix of cash flow, um,
100%.
properties, and also either lump sum or buy and hold, strong growth properties as well.
Well, the idea of sustainable property portfolio in the right structure is basically that it's not having all the blue chip investment. I did this one video where I talked about, well, I have a client who had all the blue chip investments, and I said how that is such a poor investment strategy having just blue chip properties, because you are paper rich but cash poor because these property cost you an arm and a leg. They're negatively geared, especially in Melbourne, to hold these properties around. So the sustainable property portfolio basically means that the property portfolio grows on its own accord. These are the types of portfolio that travels in generations. They're inheritable. The bank looks at the portfolio and provides the serviceability. The personal dependence on providing the serviceability disappears when you talk about sustainable portfolios. So 100%, I completely agree that it's a mix of growth, yield, and return. And when you combine all of them in the right sort of mixture, you have this wonderful dish that you can move around and do whatever you want. That's the truest nature of freedom that you talk about, yeah, that you hear
Yeah,
people talking about.
yeah, absolutely. And so, if for the first time investors who are, are part of are starting up their journey, right? What would and say, generally people have 100,000 to invest or whatever. They might have a little
Hmm.
bit of saved up. Which Where would you get them to start
Look,
with the
you start off at
foundations?
foundation 100%, and the reason being that your aim should not be a payday in the future when you're ready to retire. Because
Mm,
if you're waiting for that payday and killing yourself while reaching that payday, yes, you might be very rich when you're retiring, but you have listed the golden years of your life and you want to really, live your life, so you've been saving, not really improving your lifestyle. Whereas if you start off the foundational stage and you catch short-term growth, and yes, you would ultimately
Mm.
get the long-term growth anyway, but if you catch the short-term growth, what that will do to you is it would help you improve your lifestyle while growing your portfolio. So, where people tend to make mistakes is they'll find most expensive property in the most poshest suburb. I'll say, oh, this property is going to double in price in 10 years. Yeah, of course, yes, it would. An average property doubles in price every 12 to 14 years. But so does graves. I always say this to my clients, buy graves. Graves have
That's
gone from
right.
like,
That's it. They're not cheap.
yeah, but I mean, they've gone from like 1,600 to like 9,200. And, mind you,
Mm.
I invest in graves, so I know exactly what do they cost. And I'm the most
No
non-traditional sort of
maintenance.
investor. Yeah,
Is there
exactly.
much
Yeah.
maintenance? Or do you have to pay
Yeah.
for someone to mow the lawns, I guess, apart from that? But okay, then the question is, how do you find the strong growth locations?
Yeah, look, very interesting. And I'm doing a session, I think, in probably 3 weeks' time, where I'm basically giving out all that information about how do you find growth locations? What are the data points that people talk about?
Mm.
What are
Mm.
these data points that you need to look at when you're identifying these growth locations? And how could you safely basically say that, okay, this is a growth location that is going to come in, and you would be able to get immense amount of growth. And I'll use some examples, and people from Melbourne would relate to some of these things. We have picked a lot of suburbs at different times. 2015-16 we were focused on Reservoir and surrounding. 17-18 we were predicting Ringwood and surrounding. Frankston and Mornington in 2020. We picked the northeast corridor of Melbourne in 21. All of these have seen tremendous amount of growth, like some all the way up to like 100% in just 5 to 6 years time frame. Now, we don't have a crystal ball. All we are doing is just playing with data. Yeah. And
Mm.
that's what
Mm.
my the magic word is, that all you're doing is understanding the demand and the supply of the area, and you're buying in the areas where the demand is significantly higher and the supply is lower. And once you understand that sort of analogy, it's pretty simple. It's basic maths. Yeah. The more the demand is going to be higher, the less the supply is available in the area. Ultimately, someone would trigger a higher payment for the house that they want. Um, and that's what you want to do. You want to sit in the suburbs where demand is significantly higher than the supply, and there is no incoming supply coming through in the door. And you know
Mm.
that the price would increase because people want to move here.
Economics 101. Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think the important thing is understanding how do you translate demand through
Mm.
the data points. And I think that's the key. Once people understand what data points to look for and how do you understand the demand, then it's not a hard ask to pick these suburbs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, so we're gonna have to keep an eye out and get some information about when you're going to do that. No
Yes.
pressure, but yeah, let's move on to the next one. We definitely want to be able to see some of these projects that you've worked on over the years as well. So,
Okay, so let's talk about. Okay, I'm going to move away from this, and I'm going to talk about basically one of the life project that we are going. So this is more about the goods and the bads and the fugly that we were talking about. Now, mind you, we have a few in the pipeline, but I've picked this one up because this is very close to my heart. I've never done a 13-unit site before. This is the first time. My sweet spot usually is 4 to 6.
mm,
But during COVID, this site came to us, and it basically spoke to us and said, "Oh, Moss, you need to buy this." And it took us almost like 6 months to convince to the vendor to sell this site to us. So um, it's interesting. So let's talk about some of this. So what are we doing with this site? This is a 4,000 square block. It's a 13-unit site. There's a lot of build over form, but there's a lot of green area. All of these are 3-bedroom townhouses, around 23 to 24 squares. We are in the DA stage. We have done the RFI. We're going towards the advertising very soon, and we are planning to start build on this. Sometime next year. It's probably mid next year, but we'll be doing some pre-sales on this as well. Now, let's talk about some good stuff. So, what is the good stuff that happened in this sort of site? So, Um, took us almost 6 months to land this site. At one point, basically, the owner walked away and said, "Nah, I'm not going to sell it to you." So we ended up sending one of our local agents to door knock and do a property appraisal for them. and and magic, suddenly, they called us and said, "Hey, how about you made us an offer a few weeks ago? We are ready to buy, or we are ready to sell." So it was an interesting mix. It took us literally 6 months to land this site. So we bought this site at about 487 per square meter at 4,000 squares. The area is selling now, retailing at about 940 per square. So we have done tremendously well, just on the development, just not only on the development side, but also on the growth side of things. So each retail price on the unit that we assume is part of our feasibility is around 800. The market is already at 900, and we haven't even started building as yet. So 13 units, 900, 100,000 each. You do the maths, that's basically the growth profit that we have, and that's the beauty of doing the developments in the growth suburbs, because that's the icing on the cake that you want to catch. Um, the the other thing, what else? So other good thing. So we've talked about a lot of good. Let's talk about some of the bottlenecks, and I'll also explain to you some of the bottlenecks that we have been forced getting on some of the other sites. Now, with this one, it's an interesting one because clearly you can see that from the side that there's a lot of continuous build form, and council definitely has issues. Now,
Mm,
for the viewers who know Victoria, especially in Melbourne, Victoria, it's not just enough to follow the res code. It's also important where the council enforces the neighborhood character, aka the objective of the site that needs to be addressed, which basically means that council can question the overbuild form or the continuous build form, even though they might have allowed a similar sort of development in the locality, um, which basically means that the VCAT is on the paper. VCAT
mm.
is basically Victorian Consumers Affairs Tribunal, and you can get the decisions overturned by the council's refusal there. Now, how do we make sure that when you end up being at VCAT? Now, we have been to VCAT a few times now, so of course, we are
I,
quite.
I said I said to you the other day, is that not a given in Victoria that you just have to factor in some
Yes, 100%.
time and money for VCAT?
100%. 100%. So yeah, look, I think if you are allowing for VCAT, you would get a really, really good indication whether you're going to go for a VCAT or a
Mm.
site or not when you're doing the due diligence. And if you're missing out all those clues, then clearly you are hanging out with the wrong crowd. Yeah. The risk is quite common, especially where you are, the first developer building, or developing bigger sites in an area or in a council where, the bigger sites have never been developed before. So you have to definitely allow it in the feasibilities, and you
And
need to have enough
yeah,
margins.
just on that, Moss, I mean, like, how do you account for in your feasibility, say a site like this, like how do you account for the extra time or the cost? Like what is the number that you put in or percentage?
Yeah, look, you have to allow it at different points here. So you have to allow for extra time. You have to allow for the weekend cost. You have to allow for the lawyer fees. You have to allow for the time that is going to take for the selling. So it's all these different costs here. You're
Mm,
looking at the interest
mm,
rate. You're looking at the cost for legal side of things. You are looking at the cost for the town plan, excess town planner, because they would be required. There's separate town planners for VCATs as well that you have to engage. You can't just go with a normal town planner because they have to build a completely different case. There is cost to discussing these or putting much more manpower and effort in going around talking to the neighbors. So, one of the things that we always tend to do is, we would always go out speaking to the neighbors and ensure that they understand what we are trying to achieve and, what the objective are, and give them an understanding that although this is a first, but it would appreciate their own prices of their own houses as well. And, and extending and almost like an olive branch to them, saying, look, we are happy to purchase your properties in the future at similar price points too. And, so you have to allow for all of this. And ultimately with VCAT sites, it's quite the key that you have to have a better, bigger margin for you to absorb a VCAT site and say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and, I know that I'm going to end up at VCAT for this side, but what is the margin that I'm happy with? Now, we
Mm.
did a lot of scenario testing with this one. Our walkaway price in this one is potentially 5 units, so we can do 5 units and still make money and still walk out of this site. So you need to understand where is your minimum risk and your maximum risk on some of these things, and what would council really allow and where you're going to push the boundaries. So yeah, this site comes pre-subdivided, so there's a house just right at the front here, and then there's massive land at the back, so you can potentially subdivide it at the middle and just use the land at the back to build for and let the house
Mm.
go like a typical splitter block as well. So you can do that, and that's the sort of the minimum exit strategy which we would take place in case touch wood things hit the
Yeah.
fan, but
Yeah.
uh, in not in this scenario though.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
yeah. um what else now? Yeah,
Um,
so
just under the regulations, so just moving on, because you mentioned that you did some scenarios where even at 5 units, which I'm assuming is that keeping the property in the front and then building at the back,
for the back, yeah.
the four at the back. Okay. What I mean with the 13, what were the things that were, and so in Sydney, you look at it and say, okay, does it um, comply with sort of the DCP and all of that. Is with the 13, was that was that sort of reaching any of these
No,
DCPs? Okay,
no,
it was still
yes.
in. Okay.
Yes, so the rest code was definitely being followed. There is nothing in relation to the Victorian rest code that we are not following here. So you're well within your legal or the rights that the council has
Mhm,
put in, especially with the
mhm,
zonings and everything. So, but in Victoria, the funny thing about Victoria is that even though you are allowing or you're following all the rest codes, um, they have this objective of the site, or should I say the neighborhood character. Are you preserving the neighborhood character of that property or not? Now, some of these areas, especially with this one, this is in Diamond Creek. So Diamond Creek is one of the very suburban areas where they've converted a lot of old low density zones into like sort of medium density zones, not very long time ago. So the people at the council are still naturally thinking about these zones as, okay, these are NRZ zones and not GRZ zones,
mhm,
whereas they have been reclassified as GRZ zones. So either they need to move away and say, okay, this is a general residential zone and we should be allowing you for the type of development that you're doing here, versus a low density zone where they would force you to just do 4 or 5. So um, yeah, it's very different to Sydney, and I always tend to tell people that every state has different requirements, so make sure, and every council has different requirements, so make sure that you understand how to work with the council, whether it's a green council, whether it's a much more sort of diverse
mm,
council, what sort of bill
mm,
forms do they allow, what sort of precedences are allowed in the area, and do a lot of market research. So we have 3 precedents in the area where people have done similar projects, they've gone to VCAT and won against council, and that's why we're pretty comfortable that we know
yeah.
those are the things that the council would consider, even though there is a good chance that the council might refuse. And
Mm,
then there is a good chance that because the council has faced this, we are not the first one in the area. There's 3 developers who's done this in the area already. The council will be a lot more pro
mhm.
in looking at some of these things.
So have you gone through the VCAT process already for this?
Not for this one in specific, no, no,
Okay.
not for this one. Yeah.
Um, and in your other projects, on average, how long did the process take from the time that you said, "Yeah, we're going to VCAT," till when you got the actual booking? I guess that's the other point. You've got to actually
Yes.
brief your council and then get a date booked in.
Yes. Look, we've been to only VCAT twice over the last 10 years. So it's not that, we are at VCAT every second week or every second. We don't want to do that. That's not a good sort of business model. uh, but, on average, you should assume that the VCAT would at least add 4 to 6 months to your time frame.
Yeah.
at
Okay.
least. Yeah.
Mm.
And that's why it's important that any site that you have a slightest sort of indication that the council might not allow it, you need to hit a healthy profit on cost and margin on cost. Because if you don't hit that, then if you're waiting say 3 years for a development project to finish, then definitely you're losing money, although you're
Mm.
making money, but because of the time period that you're allowing for, you're
Mm.
losing money on the site. So it's quite the
Yeah.
key.
The internal rate of return of your.
100%.
And so, what has been the fugly bit so far, or has it not gone to that stage as yet, and hopefully
Well,
not?
yeah, look, I mean, I always look at some of these things as an opportunity. Some of the fugly things that I want to talk about is not pertaining to this side, but uh, having an understanding of what your decision points are when you're doing the builds. Look, I mean, every developer, when they start doing the journey, if they say that they've hit every development 100%, they would definitely be lying. So you have to manage your risks when you're doing these developments. Now, when you come towards the project planning side of things and you're looking at your critical path, it's important to stop and rethink and redecide the decision points. And when I say decision points, when do you start to build? When do you stop? um, you know when does the da when do you want to sell? What's the exit strategy? All of these are
Mm.
key decision points in your critical path, or the the decision making cycle. So I just wanted to share a very sort of quick experience that we had, especially in 2017, where the price was significantly higher and we bought a property at premium, and the market started to plateau now, which basically means that the retail price that you were experiencing in the feasibility is starting to disappear. Now we knew that the market has a muscle memory, and they would always come back to the previous price points. But it basically meant that if we end up building this and bringing the final product out or renting out the final product, then that would be such a super silly thing to do, because one, the established houses would always sell at a lower price point, and two, the holding cost would be a killer, of a site for a 4 or 6 unit site. So you have to almost stop and think about the strategy as to what you're going to do in that scenario. Now, in that particular scenario, what we ended up doing is, we had the approval or a building approval. We went for the building permit, but we basically improved our LVRs, because there is a disconnect that happens when you are building the site versus when you're going towards the construction. So there is more money that is required to fund the construction as a portion. We basically use that money to improve our LVR upfront on the land, to reduce the holding cost to basically nil. And we waited for the market to basically come back. Now, yes, it added a bit of lead time into development, but we didn't ended up losing a lot of money, because or nothing in truest sense. Yes, we impacted our internal rate of return because it added an extra sort of 9 months into the project. But when the prices did come back, they came back a lot more stronger, and we were able to exit it at a much more higher rate. So hadn't in hindsight, if I think about some of these things, if I would have gone back and if I would have thought about developing this and developed it and brought it out into the market, then I wouldn't have been able to deliver the returns that I was think that
Mm.
we ended up delivering in the first instance. So building is not always the right thing to do. Sometimes it's better to not build and hold or
Mm.
wait.
Mm.
And it's always the key that you have to stop and rethink what is the best decision to do right now. What are the exit strategies? And sometimes exit strategies are better. You just do a DA and exit out of the deal. You don't have to make an extra sort of 200,000-300,000 and go through the whole construction process.
Mm.
So you can
Mm.
recycle and come out and do it again. um,
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, that being able to reassess and go, is building and the time, or could you potentially rent it out in the meantime and hold off? Obviously, you need to be able to, and this is where it is helpful to have someone help you do the numbers, like talk to, whether it's a consultant or a mentor. And I think we often go into development thinking we have to build,
yes.
and we have to build
Yep.
now, and
And
that
yeah,
that's
people.
not necessarily the right thing at the time.
Yeah, and people tend to make that mistakes time and time again. Yeah, so they would have done a DA at a particular price. They don't go back and do a market study. They don't go back and revisit the numbers. They don't do feasibilities after feasibilities again. They might have done one feasibility 1.5 year ago, and all of a sudden you see them developing. Now, it's not necessary that you develop. You might be making 80% of your profit, by just, or your profit that you were planning to hit by just running the DA. I have a really good friend of mine. He has picked up a site in Frankston he bought last year. He's just run a DA on it. He bought it at about 950. The site is valued at about 1.5, and he hasn't even finished
Yeah,
the DA
amazing.
yet.
Wow.
So I said, well, that's your exit point. You don't have to go ahead and develop this, but yeah, you might deliver an extra $200,000-300,000. But for what? For all this hassle of
Mm,
building an extra
mm,
8 units, might as well redo it. Use another sites and just continue
yes,
doing it faster. So
because
yeah,
the pain and stress of
100%.
of,
Yes.
of developing eight townhouses. Oh my goodness! Like
Yeah,
yes,
and look, I think one thing that people don't appreciate is that every development leaves a bad taste in your mouth, no matter what they say. Yes, the money, relieves some of the pain, but it would definitely leave a bad taste in your mouth. Yeah, because especially in
yeah.
Melbourne,
Mm,
and you just
mm,
need to make sure that you're not overemphasizing on the bad, but looking at the good and looking at it
yes.
as an opportunity to move forward quite quickly from there. So
Absolutely. Diamonds on the Hill. Are there any other projects to share, or what's next on your
look,
slide deck?
I just wanted to talk very quickly about something that has been going in my sort of headspace all this while,
Hmm.
and this is more about how to select a developer or a JV partner, and what does that really mean, because yes, it sounds very cool, yeah, 10 projects in 2 years, but how do you make sure that you as a developer or you as a JV partner, what do you have to make sure that you're providing or you're looking for as a client, when you are doing developing yourself or looking for developers yourself, so now, some of the things that I've called out is, how long would the project take? How long is the timelines? What sort of skin in the game does the developer brings or the JV partner brings? What sort of management fees does the JV partner charges? That's an interesting one, because a lot of developers would basically sit on the fence line and charge a humongous amount of management fees that is hidden into some sort of a
Mm,
percentage that they wouldn't call out on. So yeah, so what is that on the offer? How are they getting paid? Overzealous returns, and that's one of the interesting one. I see time and time again, people saying, oh, 40% return per annum. Understand, why would a person offer 40% return per annum?
mm,
If I work backwards, an average developer, if they deliver a feasibility profit of say 20% margin on cost, yeah, which basically means that they're delivering 67% cash on cash return. Now, if the project is 2 years, that's basically 33% per year cash and cash. So how can they really deliver 40% return per annum if
mm,
their feasibility profit is 20%? So having that sort of thinking is quite key.
mm,
That where this affordability comes in, is the profit margin the real profit margin? So feasibilities, it talks about everything. Yeah, understanding the feasibilities, calling out where they are overestimating the margins or overestimating GRVs, or the plans that do not work, or yeah. So it's quite the key, when you're selecting or to find the right project or investing in the right project, that you understand basic feasibilities yourself as well. um, Lenders in the background, that's quite the key. Understanding who is taking first mortgage, who is taking second mortgage. There is a lot of bad or ugly stories around, where you have non-bank lenders compounding daily interest rates, eating away all the profits. So making sure that you are not part of any of those sort of developments where that there would be very less sort of pool left behind
mm,
once the
mm,
the lenders takes their share. So you know and then personal assets, what sort of personal assets, or the securities that the partners are providing towards this. um, Lifestyle, what sort of lifestyle are these developers or these JV partners projecting, I always find it quite funny that there is all these people flaunting expensive lifestyles, and well, naturally the way I think is, well, if they're flaunting an expensive lifestyle, there has to be a pretense for them to to keep this lifestyle up and about. So clearly they would be using your money to keep that sort of personal lifestyle of theirs. um,
Ouch. Yeah.
and age and experience, look, I think that's the key. I always say this to everyone who basically touches me, that raising money is easy. It's not a hard thing. It's what comes behind raising money is the experience. How many property cycles these people have seen, how many DAs have these people managed, what sort of building approvals have these people managed to get through, what sort of councils do they work with. So it's quite the key. It's quite important. I think people tend to put a lot less towards it, and I tend to always appreciate people who come from age and experience and have done a lot of work in this space. um, so yeah, and then finally, approvals and due diligence. Do as much due diligence as possible. It's never enough. No matter what you say, how you say it, there are red flags
Mm,
if you need to find them. So you would find those red flags, if there are there. It's just a matter of being much more proactive and open about, asking the right questions and being the right person. So
absolutely. So, I mean, this is a good little checklist for anyone that is looking to enter into a partnership with a developer. I know this is something that has been brought up quite a lot in the community. I have been speaking to a few people. I know, obviously, with you as well, around how do we educate investors? So we're not talking about educating developers, people to
yes,
become developers, because more and more so we're seeing more people who don't have the time, more the knowledge, that have a bit of money. Obviously, the property market's gone up. A lot of people have some equity. People are setting out self-managed super, wanting to be part of developments, and that's not a bad thing. It's just that, as with anything else, I mean, this is your money. You need to be able to make sure that whatever you're investing in, that you've done your homework, and you have a level of um, assurance to yourself, because at the end of the day, there is no guarantee. It doesn't matter how brilliant the developer is. It doesn't matter. COVID happened, right? No one was. No, it doesn't matter how again, how experienced the developer is. If you get hit by something that you just cannot expect, earthquake out of nowhere, right? I mean,
100%.
things like that
Yeah,
happen. Is this, you have to be mindful that there is no guarantee that your funds will be, you will get back all your funds, but there is risk management that you can take. And
and that's the key. I think knowing the unknowns up front and understanding how are you mitigating the risks and what sort of exit strategies are available to you. I think that's the key to basically every development. If you are not assessing the risks up front and not knowing the risks up front about any development, then you're always in the dark. You would always have a short side of the stick towards yourself. So it's quite the key that you understand what sort of exit strategies are you looking at, what sort of control do you have on the project. Are
mm,
you just
mm,
an investor who's invested the money and waiting for the payday to happen, or do you have control over the project?
mm,
Can you make, are you a decision maker? Can you drive the decision making process? Because these are the key things that is going to make or break the project. um,
yeah.
uh, so yeah.
And you, as the investor, being clear as to where your money is going and how that's
Yes,
being spent.
yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Um,
That's where it stops.
that's where it
I'll stop
stops. Yeah.
sharing.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much. Before we wrap up, and I appreciate people that have asked questions and all of that. Um, tell us a little bit about how, if people are interested, in what capacity they can talk to you, obviously, about working with you, but also a little bit how they can be kept informed of that session that you're talking about. I think that's a really important one for people, using those tools to be able to understand where to find these growth areas. That is absolute gold.
Definitely, yeah. So I'll share definitely on in the group the link as to how to attend it. It would be a private session, so we are only
Mm.
going to extend the links to people who want to join. We don't want to advertise this over Facebook. We don't want 1,000 people coming into some of these things. So it would be a controlled sort of session. So yeah, anyone who drops in, either message me or message Cheryl or drop in the comments below. We'll reach out to you and provide you that link so that you can register it. And we'll share that link, in the personal forum as well, so that people can attend.
Yeah.
In reaching out to me, look, I'm always open and upfront, and I'm always, putting my hand up to anyone who needs assistance. We never tend to really market ourselves out there. There is, a lot of word of mouth that happens through us. Success naturally, attracts the clients, and we always usually have our plate full. But I'm always happy to, assist people. Always happy to, guide people. If you want to reach out, you know where to find me. And yeah, always, looking for people to either grow together. I always say this, there's enough money in the pot for everyone to make. So
Mm. Mm.
don't feel shy in sharing that information, and I'm always up for it. There is a website there. You can log in and set up a time, and and look at my calendar and book something in, or you can PM me directly or jump into the comments. So yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, Moss. Thank you so much for sharing your journey, your experience, and some very sage advice around, not only for developers but for investors looking to get into to development. Again, Moss is extremely busy, but always seems to find time to be able to help and give back to the community. So I just want to say a big thank you, not just from me, but the rest of the Property Development Australia community. And it's great to have people like you, and obviously quite a few others who are continuously giving back and helping educate and share, support and advice as well. So it's great to have you here, and thank you. But thanks for you, very informative. All good. So um any final words from you, Moss, before we wrap up for the evening?
Stay safe, have fun. It's very, very important to have a lot of fun, no matter what you do, how you do
Absolutely.
it.
Yep.
Just make sure that you're having a lot of fun. So
Yeah. Yeah. And surround yourself with fun people. Like, I need to come up with a sign off, thing. Fist pump. So thank you everyone for joining us this evening, wherever you are in the world, in Sydney, Melbourne, all across Australia. Thank you so much. In the UK, Peter, if you're still with us as well, I hope you are all safe and well. And we'll see you next week on the Business of Property. Take care. Bye bye.